wait for confirmation.
Do we get a beep or something?
No, just a little notice that the meeting is now being recorded.
Okay. This is the Enfield Planning Board. It is Wednesday, July 12th, 2023. We are meeting at the Enfield Public Works Facility. And I'm calling the meeting to order at 6:31. Our members present from my left.
Linda Jones.
Eric Russell.
Dan Kiley. I'm David Frack.
I'm Phil Vermeer.
Brad Rich.
Tim Jennings.
Okay, staff people.
Bob Taylor.
Whitney Banker.
Okay. Nobody here from the public?
Except.
Oh, we do have online.
Jeannie McIntyre from the Young Valley Land Trust. She'll be.
Okay, she's
presenting
gonna be
acceptance.
presenting, right?
Correct.
Okay. So, Eric, what's going on with our select board?
Well, I really don't have any report. I was unable to attend the most recent select board meeting. So I was there.
Okay,
Report this one.
all right,
Could I ask a question?
sure.
So the board, where's the board in the process of deciding what about the beach and?
We're waiting for,
That's done.
okay,
The recommendation is done and was submitted, and you'll be talking about it on Monday.
okay, come Monday.
All right. Rob, what's going on in the land use administrators world?
Let's see, it's been actually very busy. We have 2 hearings scheduled for your next meeting. So we've been doing the notices and the advertisements and working with the applicants for that. You'll be hearing about all of that, 2 weeks from tonight. You probably saw it in the paper today. Big news is that the Shaker Museum has agreed to terms to purchase La Salette. And so.
Purchase price disclosed.
Not disclosed, but they did coincidentally announce a $3 million capital campaign simultaneous to that announcement. So I think that there's purchase in that capital campaign. I'm sure some carrying costs as well.
Sure.
But the article in the paper has announced that their intention is to keep it fairly similar to what it's doing now. They want to keep the light display and the grounds, and I believe that the deal includes equipment and all that stuff. And so I think there's a general sense in the community of satisfaction with that announcement. So I'm happy. I've worked closely with the Shaker Museum and have good contacts there. And so we're, there's economic development there. I think a lot of people came to Enfield as a result of the holiday lights. So I think that's a good thing to keep that going, and it won't get developed, which some people probably are happy and relieved about. It was as a consequence of our zoning change. But I think the value had gone up because of the density and obviously the sewer connection available there. So it will not be developed. So that's sort of off the table. The 2 major ones that I'm working on, as you guys are probably well aware, Laramie Farms has communication with Mr. DiVitetto today. And also I've been talking to Chinburg, which is the one that has purchased the sale on the Bob LaCroix land behind Shaker Valley Auto. Both of those potential developments, their biggest threat for success is going to be Route 4 access. New Hampshire DOT. Particularly the Chinburg property, the one on it's basically on the corner of Lovejoy and Route 4. They have a little tiny sliver of frontage comes down onto Lovejoy near the bridge. Unfortunately, that's in a flood zone and it's wet and it's not very wide. So they're looking to come down onto Route 4, but with the size of the development being contemplated, state of New Hampshire is going to insist on a turning lane and maybe additional improvements to the road. And the problem there is there's not a lot of room. It's a very narrow right of way through that part of town. Those houses, as you guys all know, it's a mature landscape already. And So the developers have been in constant communication with us. We facilitated the meeting with DOT. Unfortunately, DOT is very rigid with what they say they need. And it'll be interesting. But I get a little bit of a, crawl under my belt for this because the state is always pointing the finger at you guys and me and zoning.
Yeah.
You guys are the
Housing,
reason
more housing.
we're not getting more housing. But when the rubber meets the road, who's gonna be the biggest obstacle? It's gonna be DOT. It's gonna be state.
Mhm.
And as you guys know, that, there's planning and zoning is one element of development, but the state permitting, not just for DOT, but for shorelands, and wetlands and all that stuff, is very, very difficult to navigate. I've done shorelands permitting. It's
Very,
not
very
easy.
difficult.
It's not easy, yeah. And obviously, the closer you get to the water, the complexity goes higher and higher.
And the expense.
Yeah, so,
And frankly, it's so complicated that you gotta hire an expert.
and what's interesting is, the Chinburg one, they have a purchase and sale. They don't actually own it yet. And they negotiated a clause for due diligence for them to try to come get permitting and approvals. And they were hoping actually to be at your next meeting for a design review. That was what they wanted to do, sort of a conceptual discussion, but with notification, formal for the abutters so they can start to identify neighborhood issues and so forth. But because of the access issues that they're so concerned about not being resolved and really, they're looking at the state, they're worried that it could take years just to get the state to make decisions. So they're really nervous about it.
Shock.
I don't give it, and I'm kind of handicapping it. I don't know. I mean,
It's too bad.
I don't know where this will go. Obviously, I've been doing everything I can as a facilitator with them to try to help them have their best chance of success and navigate our process, which I think they're fairly satisfied with the response that they're getting from the community. Like I said, the biggest wild card for them right now is the state of New Hampshire DOT. And it's not even really DOT Region 2, which is based here in Enfield. It goes up the channel, goes up to construction and design at Concord. And so that's that. Buildings, again, very busy. Liam's been very busy. We are recovering, so to speak, from impacts of the big storm that came through Sunday night and into Monday and all day Monday and even into Tuesday. Significant impacts. I'm sure Eric will be getting briefed on that at the next select board meeting. We're on the sort of meter now for FEMA. We're hoping that the disaster declarations will cement and that we will get support from them, which is customary for these kind of disasters. I know that President Biden has declared a national disaster. And so there's going to be FEMA relief hopefully in our future. The tally so far has gone over 100,000 already for Enfield. We had significant impacts up Lock Haven and on the feeder roads, Lock Haven, Holly Drive, which is private road, was impacted significantly. Ivy Road, Potato. And if you just drive, I drove over for dinner tonight over Jones Hill, and there's significant erosion right on the shoulders. That's, I think, very prevalent around town. So we're using up a lot of aggregate materials. One of the things I was most proud about a week or so ago, Lebanon had significant damage. And we responded as mutual aid with our DPW to help them. It was Stevens Road was washed out between Hanover and Lebanon. So we sent our crews over there to help them at that time. Chips were down. Well, when the chips were down here Monday, guess who came over here to help us? It was the City of Lebanon.
Nice.
They had their 10-wheelers here running material out of Pike and Twin State. And they brought this machine. It's like $1 million truck. They call it a vac truck. It has a giant reservoir on board and it has pumps and vacuums. So they could go to the culvert issue you were having on Holly Drive.
Yeah.
They went and relieved a bunch of those where basically the problem is the debris comes down and caps up a culvert. So the water doesn't go through the culvert anymore. So it jumps the culverts. It starts to just wipe out. the
It
road.
happens so quick.
So quickly. And there was one on Lock Haven up the road here. They actually had 3 culverts under their driveway still just wiped it out. It's
Yeah,
bad.
the one on Holly Drive, the Rippies, leach field, disappeared in 30 minutes.
Yep.
30 minutes, we watched it go away.
Yeah.
It's just crazy.
And that one really was probably the most significant from a health standpoint. But Liam Ahrensweig is our building inspector and health inspector. And he had, he's working with the residents on Holly Drive. They've moved out of the house. And they're making first stabilization repairs to ensure that things don't get worse on site. But then John Downing and the septic system designers are working to do the repairs eventually.
Yeah.
And so that'll all get resolved. And but this one's gonna hurt for a while. I think, Enfield's feeling it. And we came through it lucky compared to Vermont. I mean, I think Montpelier and
Ludlow and
Ludlow and Killington was just pounded. If you look, I saw on the Washington Post, the rainfall totals for New England. And the strips through Vermont where they got up to 10 inches of rain in 48 hours. There's a couple of spots in New Hampshire, Ackworth, absolutely pounded. I talked to somebody this morning from Ackworth. They said it's over $1 million already. And they haven't even really assessed everything. And as you know, this is round number 3 for them. They've had disaster after disaster. And where they did mitigation type work, where they upsized culverts and they did upgrades to the systems, those held. But any place where they replaced in kind, gone.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very steep in Ackworth, so that's a nature of the beast over there. But,
and there's a flood warning for tomorrow.
we are saturated. We've had a lot of water.
Yeah.
We got hit in Plainfield. This was 3 weeks ago for us. We had significant damage down there. We actually lost a couple of roads gone. And where the Meriden Deli and the Meriden Garage are, those 2 buildings almost floated away. They lost land, So that's really been dominating what's going on with these guys here. And a lot of overtime but we're hopeful and confident that we'll get some FEMA support as we have in the past. So that's that. Town manager's on vacation, but we are working on a couple of projects, even in his absence. The federal grant that we got for the scenic byway there to do some work along the edge of Route 4A. We're gonna build a pedestrian path, multi-purpose pedestrian, so biking in. People on
When's the
foot.
town manager get back from
He's
vacation?
gonna be back this weekend. He'll be at the select board meeting Monday. We're doing a lot of stuff with regard to Mascoma Lakeside Park. As you know, we got a big grant down there for the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which will do some really neat improvements to the parking in Mascoma Lakeside Park. We're building an outdoor classroom, it's nature trails. I was down there last week with a wetlands scientist doing delineation of wetlands. And sort of simultaneously that scenic byways grant, there's parking proposed along Main Street right at Lakeside Park. To be parallel parking to actually help some of the volume of parking on Main Street. And then, of course, get it down to La Salette and Shaker Museum. We're happy that this whole thing with the Shaker Museum has transpired because we're highly likely to get their support for the rights of way that we need. The Catholic order did not want to encumber the land at the very 11th hour for us. So they were just kind of like, we don't want to give you the rights of way, have somebody else take it over. So it could have been sort of in jeopardy, but because I think Shaker, this will get people from Main Street to the Shaker Museum with high safety. As you guys know, we had a fatality down there last year. And we actually had a girl get hit on 4A down by the beach. So that was kind of the narrative, I think, that helped us win that grant. And there's a lot of permitting involved, rights of way. That's one of Ed's biggest challenges, dealing with Fish and Game is actually the landowner adjacent. And so we're working on that. There's a lot of work entailed in that. You will be hearing from the town of Enfield at the next meeting for the subdivision at 17 Granite Place, which is the piece of property in front of Shaker Hill Granite that is slated to be public safety complex. We are working with the landowner, Rob Malls, for that subdivision. So that'll be the application for you guys at that time. And then the other exciting one is the Dartmouth Sailing is on for a minor site plan review for you guys at the next meeting. They have a wealthy benefactor who's come forward with a significant donation to basically build all new at the Dartmouth Sailing Facility on Shannon Boulevard. So that one's kind of a neat project. It's first class. They've got a great architect on the job. It's engineers, you know, the full 9 yards, so shorelands, all that stuff. So that'll be a fun one for you guys at the next meeting. So those are the two hearings. Real estate tends to be very busy at this time of year. We've got actually the inventory of properties is kind of going up a little bit. Probably see there's two really nice houses on Shaker Hill Road. Still including that really pretty red one. Taking a lot of calls on that. It's a fairly big piece of land there.
Yeah, that's 2 acres.
2 acres.
Yeah, yeah. Not a lot of frontage, so, you know, there's a few people are going, obviously, one of the things that dominates people calling me are people that are sort of in the rental business now. You know, people that are investment, buying properties and renting them. And it's not uncommon for some guy that's an engineer that quit his job and bought a bunch of rental properties and now is a landlord. And I had a guy talk to me last week who's got 3 or 4 properties now in Enfield. And he wants more, you know, he's looking for more rental properties. Obviously, the rental business, as you guys know, is a good business to be in because it's just high demand and, you know, with rental prices going like this too. So that's it, unless you guys have any questions.
I got one. Did they find a temporary location for the library?
That's an interesting one too. So last I had heard, I had facilitated a meeting for town manager and a guy named George Merrill who owns the building that was Artec
Okay.
next to Proctor's. That's been for sale. He closed down the business. He's been trying to sell it. And so Ed had a very productive meeting with that owner about the possibility of renting that space as a temporary town office and library. Interesting, like literally the next day, I got a call from somebody that wants to buy it. And so it may get bought out from underneath that deal.
Well, he came over to look at the Lutheran church. And
Yep.
that was way too damp for
Yep.
books. That basement
Yep.
is wet. So that was a non-starter. And I said, have you checked with La Salette?
Mm.
And I said, you know, this may work.
It may
Where the
work.
town can help subsidize La Salette
Yes, yeah.
while they're going through this purchase.
Yeah,
process.
that's all sort of new development as of.
That's all new. Well,
Yeah.
Ed's been gone. So
Yes.
I know
yes.
he went out there to take a look right after, because I mentioned it to him. I said, did you check with La Salette? And then he went out there. I think. he
That's
went
got
out
some
there.
potential. Think of all the parking that's there.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was, the original plan was that they were gonna do public safety complex first, which would free up police, fire and ambulance. So those spaces could be temporarily occupied by, town office and library function. But the timeline for the Whitney Hall project has come up. So they're sort of gonna be happening simultaneous. And so that's presented a challenge that the select board is gonna be working on with Ed to try to figure out what to do on a temporary basis. I know that we've all been sort of nervous about them coming down here. You know, that the town clerk will be right here while we're having our meeting. You know, they'll be registering cars right next door,
Mhm.
which I think is not necessarily the ultimate option. I mean, it's obviously if we have to, but the La Salette, I think, is probably a winner now.
That could be a win-win.
Yes, yes.
Excellent. Okay,
Question, something.
go ahead.
When we looked at that 43 acres, wasn't that the one where Bob LaCroix came in and wanted to widen his driveway for a set 50-foot access
Yeah,
and a
Yes.
little switch here and there?
yeah,
And he did do that, and
And
that,
he did do that, so.
so that
isn't it-
property does have a right of way
Right.
through the middle of the auto parts and the car dealership.
Mm-hmm.
But they are very resistant to using that because it's an active business there. They don't see that as a really viable solution for family housing in the back. So they've been looking at a couple of different options. The one that sort of goes with the property is opposite Baltic. You see there's like a little logging road that goes up in there. That one is, you know, the sight lines for DOT are not good. There's wetlands crossings. Bob LaCroix also owns like 5 or 6 single-family homes along that way that they might be able to talk them into selling as well. But again, I think the limitation is right of way is tight there.
Yeah.
And to be able to put in a turning lane, they need to expand it to at least another probably 16 feet or so. It's just the road is not there. Oh, a couple of things. I was gonna mention, we did successfully get the property owner on Beaver Point to remove the structure. That was something I've been working on for about 3
It's
years now.
gone.
It's gone.
Wow.
And that was a huge win for us. We were very happy to work with, well, the property owner, and he's friends with Mike Davidson. They're old Dartmouth fraternity buddies, and so, Mike Davidson's right-hand guy named Tim Sador, who you guys probably remember, was instrumental in helping facilitate that. We worked with, DR Key of Lebanon and Hammond from Canaan, a combination tag team. DR Key came with the excavator and crunched it into Hammond's dumpsters, and they're gone.
Good.
It was a building that was falling down.
Yeah, it was right on the rail trail, right on the point there, between the rail trail and the lake.
Yep.
Not far from Lakeside Park, maybe, I don't know, 600 yards down.
Where the rock cut is.
Yeah, right near the cut. And, we're also happy to report, and Selectmen will probably hear from, Ed on Monday night, the place where there was a fire on Route 4,
Mm-hmm.
they wanted to tear it down right on site right there, but the fire marshal wouldn't let them do it. They were doing arson investigation, so it's still standing consequently. And the Hammond called me last week and they wanted to let us know that that will be gone by the end of this month.
Good.
The big challenge there is that they have to have an assessment done for lead and asbestos. They come in with a company that does an assessment and any remediation, and then it'll get crunched into a dumpster. And as you guys know, Hammond is a great company local that has been doing all this kind of work. They do a lot of demolition. That's their forte. So excited about that. And I do have at some point later in the meeting, I want to talk about Class 6 roads, so we can revisit that. We don't have to talk about it now. We can
Okay.
talk about it later.
Thanks, Rob. Next is not the agenda, the minutes from our June 28th meeting. Anyone have any questions, comments, suggestions?
I found no errors.
You did it again, Whitney.
It's good.
Make a motion that we accept the minutes as is.
Second.
Motion made by Brad, seconded by Phil. All in favor?
Aye.
Say aye. Opposed and abstentions.
So stay.
Okay. Minutes are approved as submitted. Thank you again, Whitney. No hearings, conceptuals, Upper Valley Land Trust, No Mountain Cell Tower. We have, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Jeannie McIntyre. I'm the president of the Upper Valley Land Trust, which is the equivalent position of executive director. And I am here because, I'm here because there's a question about whether you need to see the current set of maps that involve the cell tower and the right of the access to the cell tower. This is related to updating our current use status and the question that Julie Huntley had about whether the planning board needed to see the updated site information. So to give you all the background on this property and the cell tower, the planning board in Lebanon, and my understanding is that years ago when the cell tower was constructed, which was constructed by Verizon on property that was owned by a private individual, the planning board received maps and site plan and went through an approval process. Verizon had a 30-year lease with the individual who owned the property. And that was a very unusual lease in that it had a provision in it that said at the end of the 30 years, the ownership of the tower would pass to the owner of the land. Well, the owner of the land gave it to a family member, and then that family member gave it to the Upper Valley Land Trust. And at the end of the 30 years, which was in September of 21, I believe, the ownership of the tower passed to the Upper Valley Land Trust. And then, and the leases that the carriers on the tower had negotiated with Verizon came to an end. And so the Upper Valley Land Trust renegotiated the leases with the 3 carriers that were on the tower. And at the same time, we updated the maps about where the tower is located and the area that is subject to the lease. And we reduced the amount of acreage that is subject to the lease. So there was a larger area around the tower that Verizon had a right to use under their old lease with the original landowner. And we redrew that line to make it straight lines and closer to the tower, because we are a conservation organization and we didn't really have an interest in having cell tower related rights active in that larger area, and there was no need to have them. The tower, the 1 acre around the tower with the straight lines on the map that I submitted to Rob was sufficient for the activities that were planned and allowed under the lease or the leases. There were some questions that we came across as we worked on these leases about how their property was being taxed and trying to figure out what was in current use and what was not in current use and why. And I came across some anomalies, like our tax bill had the current use part of our property and the non-current use activity, the commercial area, on one tax card, but the other tax card has a lot of the road on it, and the road should not be in current use, but it didn't. I'm not sure how they calculated, but maybe it was just for ease of how the billing was done, but it seemed as though there were some corrections that could be made to the current use to make the current use approval match the updated survey. And so when I went to Julie to ask her about how we would go about that, she raised some questions about whether we were changing our site plan and suggested that perhaps if we were changing our site plan, the planning board should be aware of that and possibly review it. I checked in with Rob about it and we had a conversation because Rob and I thought the use of the cell tower is not changing. The cell tower is located where it always was. The leases or the road is where the road was. There's a fence around the bottom of the cell tower. The fence is not moving. There's no activity there's no change in use at all. What's changed is the map that shows what these people have lease rights to. And they have less lease rights than they used to have, not more. So it wasn't really clear what the planning board might be reviewing, but we wanted to come to you with the updated surveys, which Rob has, and I don't know if you've projected
I
them
did.
or shared them.
I made photocopies, Jeannie. They all have 4-page document, and it's in order that you sent. So there's page 1, page 2, page 3, and 4. So
Yeah.
you can refer to those documents
Yep.
that you sent to me. They've all got copies in front of them.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't have much to say about them except that, they're a little bit different than what was approved back in whenever it was 30 years ago, 1988 or something. The difference is in the shape of the space that is around the bottom of the cell tower. It is now a triangle through its straight lines, and it didn't used to be. And it shows the road and a calculated area for the road, which was not part of the prior survey showed where the road was located, but there was no calculation of what would not be enrolled in current use because of the fact that it is a, it's a development, I guess.
So it was my contention that there was no site plan review needed, but Julie was adamant, so we said, for clarity, for purposes. And I'm glad that Jeannie's able to log in from the comfort of her home tonight. But we wanted to get your opinion on this because I will sort of defer as we talked about at the last meeting. If there's sort of if there's a question on opinion about interpretation, I definitely like to sort of err on the side of getting you guys to weigh in and tell me what you think. Again, as I interpret the zoning ordinance, they would only need to come see you if there was an expansion of the use or a change in use. There's no expansion or change in the use. This is really a mapping for current use. And so I think one of the things that's throwing Julie off, you read on this map that she's been seeing from the land trust, it says right there, site plan. Right.
Yeah, the
So I
first,
think that's part of the confusion for us, right, Jeannie?
yeah, I actually talked to her a little bit about that, and I said, when a surveyor is making a map of a site, very often the title of the map is site plan, which is different than a regulatory site plan review. And
Yes.
I wasn't, and I did say to her, I don't object to asking you all to do a review, but I didn't know what application form or how, what would the request look like? Yeah, so I think that is the source of confusion. It's just the labeling on the survey documents. Yeah.
So
I guess my only question would be, is the new triangular area, has that been fenced in?
The fence is actually smaller than that new triangular area. The fence is where the fence was before. It's inside that area, and I think it shows on one of those maps.
Page two.
Yeah. Page two,
Yeah.
you see the fence.
yeah, you can see
And the fence is the same.
Fence has moved.
Has not moved.
I don't see what we would have to review.
Yeah, but there's no change of use.
Well,
I thought that's what you guys would say.
they have the right to have leases within the previous footprint.
Right.
They're still doing that.
Right.
You don't have to lease the entire footprint. You can lease any portion of it they want.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you recall, I drew a map here. We had said a couple years ago for another cell tower.
Right.
Where they did not have a fenced in area.
Right.
Any change there, we could say was an expansion of use because it was, not
Yeah.
delineated by the fenced in area. Whereas if they're doing changes within that fenced in area, I mean, I look at it like a store bringing in a new cooler in their store.
Yeah.
It just doesn't really differentiate, so.
It might make a difference if they would put a second tower.
Well, that's what I mean. If they're gonna add a second tower, it's,
Yeah, I would say
That's an expansion of use.
that's expansion.
Yeah, but that's not happening, so.
But we did have one, if you remember, it was up on Follinsby.
Right.
They wanted to add a generator
Right,
and they didn't have a fence.
Right.
So you could kind of argue that it was an expansion, no matter what, because
Right.
anything new sort of expanded their footprint. There wasn't a delineation with the fence.
right.
And that one also involved the land trust, if you recall.
Because a portion of it was,
Yeah,
Went
it was
across
surrounded
the
by
land trust.
easements from these guys.
right,
And actually Kurt was the volunteer monitor for the easement, so he had a lot of inside knowledge, and we did work with Jason at the land trust to really be real
Right.
specific with them about not infringing at all on the land trust's easement, so I thought that was a success for us.
Okay, for the size that was the commercial part before and the size that it is now, does the triangle increase or decrease the amount that's the commercial part?
Well, I think that the question is, and this is something that I'm gonna go through again with the person in my office who does the mapping. There was 2.16 acres in the prior, in the way that it's been taxed. But I'm not convinced that 2.16 acres included the land under the road. Because what we have now, the land under the road plus the triangle at the top. And the triangle at the top is, the triangle at the top is about an acre, I believe. It's certainly smaller than the 2.16 acres, substantially smaller. But I'm not sure if when you consider the road, it may turn out that the land, that there's actually a little bit less land enrolled in current use than was before. But again, if there is a net increase in the commercial area, it's going to be a technical increase. It's going to be the result of the fact that the original calculation was not right. It's not because there's actually something new happening.
Yeah, and that's a tax assessing
Yeah,
question and not a planning board question.
exactly. It's something for
Yeah.
Julie to deal with, not us.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if we had a lot that had 4 buildings on it and the owner decided to tear one of the buildings down,
Right.
we would have nothing that we would need to look at. But the assessing department might want to come in and reduce the landowner's assessed value. So,
Yep.
you know, long story short, I think you need to continue your discussions with the assessing department. And we thank you for bringing it to our attention and letting us look at the facts. And I think speaking for my colleagues on the board, I can very safely say that there's nothing that we can do for you, much as we would like to.
Well, thank
Maybe we
you.
should say
Well, we
we're
could-
satisfied.
We need a
Yeah,
motion to that effect.
I don't think so, because
No.
it's a conceptual,
right.
this is an informal discussion.
The only thing we might want to do is have Rob send a letter to assessing,
I will do that.
saying that
Communicate with Julie in the morning.
we're not gonna, it's not, we don't consider a change to the
You
site. plan.
concur with my opinion, which is the site plan was.
There is,
Yeah.
I
there is no
think that
need for a
Julie
site-
will
site plan.
appreciate that.
Yeah, so she can put it in
She
the
had
file.
said that, she had said that it would be helpful for her to have a document in the file.
Yeah.
So I think that is
Sure.
exactly a good thing. So thank you for doing that.
I will do that in the morning, Jeannie. Thank you so much.
And you
Okay.
have the minutes to rely on for further discussion.
Right, and they're always right.
That's right.
Thank you
Okay.
all and good night.
Thank you, Kate. See you
Thanks for
soon.
joining us. Okay, we have, no new business that I'm aware of.
Oh, maybe I could use that for my class 6.
Okay,
That's technically not a new one. So if you recall, years ago, I think it was 2020, we heard through the grapevine that the city of Lebanon was reviewing their class 6 roads. They had actually established a class 6 committee in Lebanon to review all of their class 6 roads and sort of make recommendations for their future in the city. They did meet probably 20 times in Lebanon, and they did make recommendations. We got involved when we found out that there were some of those class 6 roads that actually had interconnection to class 6 roads in Enfield, particularly off of Methodist Hill Road. It's Atherton and McAllister are the 2 roads. And so when we caught wind of it, it was a discussion amongst this board. And it was decided that we would send a letter signed by the chairman to the city of Lebanon officials. I think we sent it to the mayor and the city manager. I've shared a copy of it again with David, because we got a notice in the mail maybe a week or 2 ago that there was an agenda item coming up on a city council meeting for specifically the roads in question with Enfield. And another one in Lebanon called Barden Road. So there's 3 roads in play. What it is there's a business in Lebanon called Patch Forest. It's the Patches. They have a gigantic tract of land. I think it's like 1,000 acres that encompasses land around these class 6 roads off of Churchill Way and, Mary Lane and a few others in Lebanon. And, they have not agreed with the recommendations and findings of the Class 6 committee in Lebanon to the point where they've taken Lebanon to court and sued them about the, actual rights that this Class 6 committee had basically outlined. And this disagreement over whether they were Class 6 in the first place, whether they were properly located, et cetera, et cetera. The complication is the Patches have a very large maple operation, and they've installed maple tubing and main lines in a spider web across this whole property to the tune of 50,000-60,000 taps, very large operation. And they don't really like having these Class 6 roads going through their sugar bush. And Lebanon had sort of disagreed with the location of those pipes and said, you gotta move those pipes. And so sort of a fight had developed between Lebanon and the Patches, and that is continuing. And now, according to Lebanon, I've talked to David Brooks, their actually deputy city manager, formerly their planner. He has said that Patches have come forward with a settlement. Basically, the court had recommended mediation and try to get them to come to some kind of an agreement to get rid of the court case. And the Patches have said, we'll give you new land for Barton Road, which would basically move the Class 6 that's here, that's in their sugar bush. They would move Barton Road to a new spot outside of the sugar bush, but still on their land, to give them a Class 6 road. And in exchange for that little deal, they want Lebanon to abandon their Class 6 roads. Again, we were most interested in not having Lebanon abandon their Class 6 roads, because it would make our Class 6 roads to nowhere. Basically, it would be like running up against a brick wall, you're done.
Dead end.
A dead end. And we have had that happen, actually. Linda's probably very familiar with it. The town of Hanover gave up on a sort of a famous Class 6 road that has made our Class 6 road, the old county road, right next to Linda's house.
In
A road to nowhere.
between, there is a short section
In Lebanon.
of Lebanon.
Right.
So
Well,
I
you get
get
to
a
Hanover.
letter from Lebanon,
Yep.
because I own that little bitty piece.
Yes. I think that one, they actually,
They made it a trail.
so that was their compromise position on a lot of these.
Right.
State law allows for the designation of a Class 6 to become a Class A trail, which is sort of a happy medium in between keeping the Class 6 as is or abandoning. Right. Because what we've seen, we have it pretty much anywhere you go, Class 6 in the state of New Hampshire or in New England for that matter. The Class 6 roads get abused. They're great for jeeping and four-wheeling and mudding. And so consequently, these Class 6 roads have just been ruined.
Right.
Obviously, Class 6 by their definition, the town does not maintain them. There is no maintenance done by the town. And so
It
without
goes-
maintenance,
It goes further than that.
Yep.
In the original rules for Class 6 roads, you were not allowed to move any of the dirt. You were not allowed to dig ditches or
no maintenance.
bury.
Right, yep.
And if, you couldn't cut any tree over, 4 inches in diameter.
Yep.
So what happened was water did what water does.
Yeah, because of the erosion of
All
the
the dirt
churning.
came down.
Yeah,
And if you look
So there's sort of
across
dry
from
brook
my
bed, right?
driveway, you'll see the piles of dirt that
Yep.
came down that hill and are now at the other end of the culvert.
so when I was selectman in Plainfield, I fought very hard to preserve Class 6 rights. There's no carrying cost to the town. Obviously, we're not maintaining them, except for maybe a sign at the beginning of the road that says, pass at your own risk, end of town maintained road, Class 6 road. Obviously, there's some other state rules. You're supposed to not drive a motorized vehicle on a Class 6 road from April 1st to June 15th. It's illegal to ride any vehicles, wheel vehicles on those roads.
Unless you're male and under 18.
That's it.
Yeah.
Obviously,
Does it
mountain
say-
bikes and
Is there in the RSA?
I don't know about that, yeah. But so anyways, to me, there was just no reason to give up on those. Because they are, I mean, some of them are very scenic, they're very pretty. And, I mean, I also feel strongly that there should be some places in town that somebody can go on a Jeep for a fun ride. So I did not feel that giving up on the class six roads was a good idea. Now, in my town and in other towns, I think Hanover included, years ago, before zoning, the towns were doing it because that was a way for them to prevent development. If we literally said, oh, that old road, give it up. What happened was the owner on this side and the owner on that side immediately owned the center of the road.
Right.
And the road was gone.
Right.
Obviously, the road still was there, but in terms of public access, public rights, it was gone. So, we did it on a few roads in Plainfield. I think Enfield has done it. Hanover's done it. And in Plainfield, we have nothing but regret for some of those roads that we let go. Because now, private owners are like, what are you doing up here? You can't be up here. This is my land. And it's like, no, really? That's too bad. I mean, we have like famous old roads and Old County Road, I would put as one of them. That was a very pretty old road that went up over. Didn't you say it was Daniel Webster?
Daniel Webster
drove on
went to
that road
that way.
when he went to Dartmouth. I
They
mean,
came up
crazy stuff. And so
through New Hampshire Turnpike.
it was our intention to go on record with Lebanon. Back then, we sent them a letter. I think David, you even attended the meeting.
I think I zoomed in on 2 or 3 of their sessions.
Yeah. So when I got the stuff from Lebanon, I sent them a copy of that letter again and just be like, what's going on here? And they gave me the background. And so I don't know what you guys think, but maybe one of us can pop in on it. It's not actually going to be next week. It's actually August 16th because the paperwork wasn't ready in time. And so I did communicate with them that the formal hearing for that will be August 16th. Which I would go if you guys wanted me to go, but I would obviously, if any of you guys wanted to do it instead, if you wanted to, that's fantastic. It's on a Wednesday night. It's city council. It's in 11.
In the case of patches, what's happened is the patches don't want to follow proper maple management practices, which is you can't run the pipes at 3 feet. But that's where they're running. If it's a class 6 road, you have to put it so that people can drive snowmobiles or drive their Jeeps along the class 6 road.
There is another layer to this.
Yeah.
The patches went prior to putting in the maple lines
Right.
to the town, to the city of Lebanon. They were given permission.
Right.
And later, the city said, after all the work was done and tens of thousands of dollars were spent.
Oh, yeah.
Then they came back and said, oh, no, well, you can't do that.
Yeah, right.
But they'd given them permission.
Oh, yeah.
But it wasn't in writing.
So who speaks for the town of Enfield? Officially?
Well, I would say it's a select board.
does.
Exactly. I would say, from an executive standpoint, but I mean, we took it as it was action by the planning board. And so the letter sent to Lebanon originally was planning board letterhead, signed by the chairman. And it was noting action taken by the planning board, basically to send a letter. So I think you're still within your rights as an organization. I think you have support from the select board for that. I mean, if you guys wanted to defer to the select board, I don't think that's a bad thing either. I mean, they may disagree, and the select board may say, screw it, we don't need.
Well, let me sort of ordinance dealing with class 6 roads that the local community would enact over and above what state law says. Would that be a planning board? Would we have a role in there? Official role in there?
If it was an ordinance, I would say yes. I think it's more of a policy, that we have a class 6 road policy.
Yeah,
That's right.
So formal control of all the roads, including class 6 roads, falls with the select board.
Yep.
However, I think this is a case where you're talking about planning and this is a issue of regional
Right.
concern would be the language they
Exactly.
use.
Yeah,
And so I do think it's appropriate for our planning board to say, hey, here's our master plan and our planning view of what you're doing to this property. Similar to how someone in Grantham is going to comment on some stuff over there, right? And I don't know who it'll be there, but I think the planning board is the place where a lot of that planning knowledge is, falls.
Yeah. and, you know, it kind of says, okay, Enfield is in favor of keeping these class 6 roads as class 6 roads. And our master plan backs that up. I.e. recreation, transportation sections, and Lebanon, you're kind of screwing this up for us. Because if we have a dead end and these are no longer through roads, then you are negatively affecting us.
Yeah.
So I think it's entirely appropriate for both the planning board and the select board, if they want to jump into this with letters.
I will say this too, in a town, the disposition of the class 6 is voted on by town meeting.
Yeah.
Town meeting is the only, I mean, the select board can't say, we don't want that road anymore, get rid of it.
Mhm.
It has to be voted on by town meeting, but in the city council can say, we don't want that road anymore, and so 9 members of the city council can dispose of that road.
What was the reasoning? They didn't want to support it in Lebanon, the roads?
So the city council supported the original designation of all these, well, not all of them, whatever ones was the committee, and said, turn them into class A trails. Class A trails are different from class 6 because you can prohibit wheeled vehicles on it. They're only open for, foot traffic and horseback, you know, that kind of stuff. And so seemed like a pretty good sort of compromise position that they thought it was a done issue and it was settled, and I don't even think they were gonna make them move their lines, because you can, on foot, you can easily go underneath maple lines. I used to do it all the time. So, but the patches were just in complete disagreement with the whole process and the designation. Although I have talked to the chairman of the class 6 committee, and he's a very, very convinced that everything that they did was right there. I mean, and the patches contend that they basically made up these class 6 roads and designated them as such after the fact. And that's their contention, that these were never roads, and there's no rights of way that exist. Where the committee chair in Lebanon said, well, just the very fact that Enfield is contending that we have them on the other side,
Yeah,
pretty much establishes, yes,
I mean,
they're class 6 on our side, they're still class 6 on your side. Unless you've got record that you've abandoned them, which they don't have any record of.
yeah, I attended a couple of those meetings by Zoom, and, you know, it was really deep into the weeds in terms of where the right of ways were and how they evolved over the years. But it was quite clear to me that they had done their research and done it very well.
Oh, yeah. And they found old timers that, you know, were alive when there was still a road and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So the city council at this point is maybe being advised by their own council that
Maybe, yeah.
we may not win this case.
Well, I think there's some feelings on the council that's just like, you know what, this has been going on for 3 years now. What do we gotta do to make this issue go away? It's a settlement. We settle. We get a new
It's just
class
a hill
6
we're
road.
dying on.
Exactly. Do we wanna keep fighting here? And so I think there's some counselors, city counselors, that are like, just be done with this. What do they want? Okay, give it to them. But I think there's some in Lebanon who are like, wait a second, if we give this up, this is a land giveaway to somebody. And to be perfectly honest, the class 6 road will be around a lot longer than this business will be. I mean, some of these class 6 roads have been around for 200 years, and if we don't get rid of them, they'll be around 200 years from now. And again, I just think there's really no incentive to get rid of them, as far as I'm concerned. It's a legacy for future generations of Enfield and Lebanon and Plainfield and all these other towns. Some of our class 6 roads are some of the neatest places to go for a hike or walk. We do have some that are absolutely destroyed, especially if they have any slope. There's a stone wall and a dry brook bed and another stone wall.
Yeah.
Literally, it could be 15 feet in elevation from the top of the stone wall
Yeah.
to the bottom of what used to be the road. Cause it's
Mud Pond Road is like that and stuff.
been just churned up and burned and,
It's a great walk, but
In Plainfield, the famous one, well, it's five towns. There's class 6 roads that go all the way around the wild game park.
Yeah.
And they're so bad that the park, the game preserve, Blue Mountain Forest or Corbett's Park, they finally built their own road on the inside of their fence.
Yeah.
So that they can navigate the perimeter of the entire park.
Sure.
Cause they're so bad. I snowmobile them in the winter. They're awesome in the winter because you can groom them and they can flatten them out, but in the summer, they're terrible. And what's happened is, there's like internet resources now. Where do you find the best mud in New Hampshire? And so there'll be 25 Jeeps will come rolling up Grantham Mountain Road looking for the class 6 roads. And unfortunately, the cops can stand there and wait for them to come out, but they don't come out from where they go in. They know how to get out, get over to Grantham or get over to Lebanon, wherever. It's kind of interesting. So I wanted to put that in front of you guys. Happy to do with it, whatever or nothing, whatever you guys decide. Do you want to send a note to the select board and ask them for opinions? I've shared with them your letter again, so they still have us on record as our original opinion. Discussions will happen in August.
Well, I don't think we wanna get involved in drafting the letter and what the wording actually says and so forth. But I do think it would probably be helpful for David if we just took a quick vote to say, yeah, we're in support of making the town of Enfield's interests known to the city of Lebanon on this issue. And then leave it
We've
up to,
already done that.
leave it up to David and Rob here to come up with the appropriate word.
Well, we've done it, but I think it's appropriate to reinforce what we already did. And now we have a master plan that backs it up, which we did not have 3 years ago or 2.5 years ago, whenever it was.
That's true.
So, we're not really adding too much, but it sounds to me like the class 6 roads need every little bit of support that they can get. And I, for one, think we should, as a board, provide that support by way of a letter. And I mean, if people want to go to that public hearing, members of this board could certainly go and speak as members of the planning board. And we could certainly, have further discussion on that, the week before, which would be our work session meeting anyhow. But just in terms of getting the ball rolling, I don't see where having Rob and I, or some combination thereof, draft something which we could then look at and then send. I don't see where that would be harmful, and it could be helpful.
So I just think, well, let me just make a motion that the board empower the chairman, working with Rob, to express to the city of Lebanon the town of or the planning board's desires regarding class 6 roads, and that they not be discontinued in Lebanon where there are continuances of roads, class 6 roads in Enfield. But,
Okay,
Yes, second.
motion made and seconded. Is there further discussion? All in favor of Tim's resolution, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? It's unanimous, Rob. We have one more chore to do.
New letter?
New letter. And, I think we'll draft it and then we'll discuss it either on July 26th or more likely the week before Lebanon has their hearing, which is our work session.
well, I think you should just draft it, send it, and then give us a copy of it afterwards.
Just send it.
All right, I'm
Full send.
willing to do that. but-
Thank you.
But
I think that was the right call.
now we can reference our new master plan in the
All right.
letter,
Yeah,
Hit the
which gives
send.
it more weight.
okay, let's see, old business. zoning rewrite project. Due to snafus and scheduling conflicts, we're still trying to get a meeting with Brandy and or her partner Rod. And she had thrown out, a meeting between myself and Rob and either her or her partner for Monday next week. I'm gonna be out of town, so that's not gonna work for me.
And Wednesday, I'm gonna be out of town.
Did you get that email that I sent?
Yes.
Okay, cause on my computer it was very questionable whether it got sent or not. So hopefully she'll respond with some alternate or series of dates and times when we can get together and just sort of have a discussion of her, you know, what she's gonna do, the sequence, what sort of involvement she's gonna want from planning board. Little bit more specifics on what she's gonna do by way of involvement from the general public, et cetera, et cetera. And, knock on wood, we'll be able to get that scheduled.
Can we get her here for the work session in August?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I would very much like that to happen.
Yes, so one of the things that, it's interesting. The grant funding has these deadlines,
Right,
but I think she could send us a bill for what we commit,
right,
and we can work as long as we need to, you know what I mean, like,
yeah,
I mean, we're looking at the exact same thing with the other grants that we're working on for Lakeside Park and the Scenic Byway. They give you all these regulations, and then they shorten up the time window for, executing the grant and actually getting the money. But we asked them, in the case of the Scenic Byways, can you commit the money, pay the bill, and do the work for a longer period? And they're like, yeah.
Yeah, I don't get the feeling that New Hampshire Housing is gonna be amenable to that because I think they wanna see the deliverables, which would be the zoning rewrite, with the actual document, but it's certainly worth pursuing. And I think Brandy said that she had worked on other New Hampshire housing grants. So maybe she has some insight that we do not yet have. Next, rules of procedure discussion. We had put that off pending,
yeah.
Ed
Yeah.
attending. And he's still being chased by bulls in the
She's in
state.
Italy right now. Yeah.
Oh, Italy. Okay.
He went to Rome.
Multiple family dwellings on one lot discussion. Our last meeting, we had basically passed a resolution that said, we would like some legal advice from the town council now. And Ed was leaving for vacation. So were you able to follow up with town council or?
I was not able to follow the town council, but I did talk to Ed before he left, and he has offered to have town council come to meet with you guys at one of our meetings. And as you know, that meeting with an attorney can be not public, off the record. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, not a public session. Technically, it's on the record, but it's not public.
Well, it's good to know, but I don't really think we need to worry about that.
Yeah.
It's not something, it's just an interpretation of wording. It's not, I think.
Yeah, at that time, we were still planning that we would have the
right.
design review with an applicant.
Right, yeah,
And so for that,
Yeah.
that's why we wanted to keep it non-public, so that we didn't.
Right.
Have that right before having the hearing with them.
Well, why don't we say for our August work session, we allot half an hour for the attorney and an hour and a half for Brandy. And if we have time for, you know, the usual housekeeping stuff, we'll run through that at the end.
I'd like to suggest a different approach. Similar,
Go right ahead.
which would be that, as much as it, having a town attorney come here at, evening, probably gonna be more expensive to do that way. That if, you, Rob, I certainly would be happy to participate. Yes, I kind of started this thing in the first place. But if we had that discussion with the town attorney outside of the meeting, I think we could come back then with his opinion. He could write his opinion basically. Here are the arguments, and then go write us an opinion and send it back, rather than take up time during a board meeting.
I think the cost of the attorney would be relatively the same, and I'm interested in hearing the discussion. Just my 2 cents.
I think you're right about the cost being equal. I don't think attorneys who do municipal work and go to, meetings on a regular basis charge an overtime fee.
Yeah.
It's just the nature of the attorney business.
I mean, if no one else wants to do that, and no one else wants to hear the discussion, I'm fine. I don't, it's not a showstopper for me, but I'm curious.
Well, as
I am
many as
too.
As many as 3 of us could attend.
No, I'd be interested to hear the discussion as well. I think discussion of how, it's not like it's only
Right.
one piece of zoning that where people make interpretations of the wording. So getting some understanding of how attorneys interpret the wording would be valuable for everybody as we move forward.
I think you're right.
Well, then a step down from what I suggested would be that we send the attorney ahead of time the letter that Kurt and I wrote, and you should certainly write your opinion. So that this can be reviewed ahead of time. We don't want to go through this whole thing. We can't do that in a half an hour and explain this topic well enough to have a discussion also within a half hour and reach a conclusion.
I think that's a very reasonable thing, and I think, I think that's the way we should proceed. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah.
It's agreed.
I guess my other question is, could we have to do it on Teams? So it doesn't have to drive up here,
Where is he located?
Concord,
I live in Concord.
Yes. Oh, one of the surrounding towns,
right,
Concord.
Hopkins.
Ring trails.
All right, yeah, I mean, I think doing it, virtually on Teams is
Right,
a very effective way to do it.
so we don't pay for his travel time.
Yeah. And mileage.
And mileage.
So let's,
Sometimes they're in the area because they have other clients.
well,
They do municipal only, I think. Actually, that firm is major municipal work.
I think we could invite him to, join us virtually, and if he comes back and says, well, I will be in the area anyhow,
Right,
we'll say, sure,
Yep.
come join us.
yeah.
Okay. That's it.
Yeah.
That's all that's on the agenda.
I make a motion, we adjourn?
Second.
Who got there, who pressed the
I don't
buzzer
know, it's
first?
pretty close.
I think it was Brad.
I'll give it to you.
Okay, but no, there's a motion on the floor.
Well, I'd like to discuss the motion.
Debatable.
We didn't, you jumped a little ahead of my brain here. We didn't, what are we doing with the master plan?
We're gonna roll that meeting into the meeting that we have with Brandy.
Okay.
And just kind of, the one that Rob and I have with Brandy. And once we get a date set on that, we'll also invite Lindsay and, just try to cover everything in one meeting. All in favor of Dan's motion? Aye. Opposed, abstentions. We are adjourned at 7:40.
Pretty good.
Not bad, the light out.